really quite honored and privileged that I can work with government in the public space, and I'll talk about it just in a moment. But also, I decided, as I was introduced here, to get involved in social enterprise in education. So, crazily, when I left FirstRand, I started 5 companies, all at the same time, which is a bit crazy. And we're growing them. It's about creating a whole ecosystem in education to solve some of the problems that we have in the country. But also in the continent. Just this Sunday and next week, I'll be part of a discussion with quite a few countries in the continent about how we should be thinking about the curriculum for our schools in the continent, how we should be thinking about education technology, and so on. So I'm going to be talking about just 2 case studies which I've had the privilege of co-founding in the education space. And just talk about some of the issues that Carrie Lee actually put on the table in terms of, how do you navigate this space? Because very often we know, especially in our country, there's a huge trust deficit between government and the private sector. A huge trust deficit between government and sometimes labor, between business and labor. But we can actually bring these parties together to solve some of the problems that we have. And I'll just show you a couple of examples of how we've managed to do that through IGUSASA Student Financial Aid Program, as well as through the NECT, the National Education Collaboration Trust. So let me just make sure this is, it is on. So, and the fact of the matter is, if you look at the whole continent, this is not just an issue that's peculiar to South Africa. We often work in parallel to one another. In other words, you have business on the one side, you have government on the other. But if we're going to change the systems in which you operate, and I've decided to obviously dedicate myself to the education system, if we just take that system, it's extremely difficult for each one of the key stakeholders, as in civil society, government, labor, or business, to change those systems by themselves. They just, the problems are complex, they're intractable, they are big, and therefore they require big solutions. They require big solutions. And very often in companies, people think, oh, it's just too complex. It's better for me to adopt a couple of schools, see how we can run programs. Maybe it's libraries, maybe it's laboratories, maybe it's training teachers, maybe it's mentoring principals and so on. But the fact of the matter is, whilst those programs are great and they make an impact, you never change the system. The government continues doing what they do, and we as private sector or even NGOs continue doing what we do. So it is in this regard that, just starting with ISFAP, I was at NSFAS. So I started as chair, non-executive chairman, by the way, of the National Student Financial Aid Scheme on the 12th of October, 2015. 2 days later, 14th of October, #FeesMustFall started. It didn't take me a week because I was asked by government to go and figure out how we could sort it out. So within a week, I presented a blueprint of what needed to be done to fix NSFAS. And it was a whole lot of things. The government at that stage was allocating about 18 billion rand to the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. The pass rates of students that were being funded was somewhere around 45% or thereabouts, which means more than half of the amount that was allocated was actually just wasted. It's our taxpayers' monies that were wasted. But more importantly, the lives of a lot of young people that were supposed to be helped were being destroyed, because if someone comes from the township, a young person comes from the township or the villages with huge hopes, they go to university or TVET college with great expectations for their families, for their village, for community and so on, and more than half of them fail, it destroys not just them as people, it destroys the whole village or the whole township, because it's like, we can never get this. We can never really succeed as people who are who come from poor working class background. But also, the private sector wasn't involved in trying to solve the problem. So I then wrote a blueprint. I remember that one night I literally did not sleep at all and wrote a whole document that says, here's what's wrong and here's how it can be fixed. Cut long story short, we went right up to Cabinet, and Cabinet said, okay, you think you have an idea, it's fine, go and do it, but there's no budget to do it. I said, fine, I'm going to go to the private sector, mobilize the private sector to actually do it. And we started in 2017, so this is our third year this year. And it's about how do we not just fund students that come from poor and working class backgrounds, how do we produce the skills that we need in the country, how do we make sure that those students who have a high propensity for failure, because they come from poor backgrounds, they may have crammed their way to get straight A's, but they get to university or TVET college, they've never seen a laboratory before, they don't know how to manage their time, they have no life skills that are required to navigate a very complex and very daunting higher education environment. And therefore they fail, not because they are stupid, not because they don't do their work, simply because they are underprepared for what they're going to come across at university. And also, when I looked at the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, we're funding a large number of students who are doing humanities degrees. Now, there's nothing wrong with humanities degrees. In fact, we need people who understand social science and how we live as people. However, there's a huge problem if there's an oversupply of people with humanities degrees and we have an undersupply of people who are doing sciences, who are doing STEM, who are doing computing and all of these things. So NSFAS is funding a lot of these people, and what happens is they end up as unemployed graduates, if they pass and graduate, because a lot of them don't. So we've got to fix that problem. And then we started off working on this. Sorry, we mobilized the private sector. If you just go back a little bit. So we mobilized the private sector, and if you look at just this picture, in a very short 2.5 years, we've got the private sector who are now part of this. The founding partners of this initiative of ISFA is Business Leadership South Africa, 80 largest companies in this country. It is Banking Association, ASISA, the Association for Savings and Investment, SAICA, who came on board and incubated the idea because I needed a platform, and SAICA was generous enough to give us a platform to be able to start whilst we're building all the systems and the technology that's required to actually run this. And then we have the FirstRand Foundation, well, because I had to get money from somewhere to actually do this. And in literally 2 months, we raised more than 200 million rand to get going. And so we've started, we now partner, when I finish just this speaking session here, we're spending some time with the National Research Foundation because we've created a pool of money for funding students that come from poor backgrounds to do post-grad, right out to postdoc. So we now working with all 26 public universities in the country because if we need to transform our academic environment, academia, whether it's universities or TVET colleges, we have to invest. We have a problem with aging lecturers who are mainly white and male. And therefore, who's going to teach our children if we're not addressing the issue of the pipeline that we need to supply universities with really good and great lecturers. So, and what we've done since we started 2 years ago is that we've created a whole ecosystem. Like, for instance, we meet with Universities South Africa, which represents all the 26 public universities, talk about learning and teaching. What are universities doing to make sure that we're preparing ourselves for the 21st century or for the 4th Industrial Revolution and so on? Because universities sometimes are worse than government when it comes to change. You find that faculties work in silos. The Faculty of Education doesn't talk to the Faculty of Science or Engineering, doesn't talk to the Faculty of Management and Economic Sciences and so on. And yet, the skills of the future about how we integrate sciences with arts, with education, and therefore we've got to have a very different idea, including the future of work, have a very different conversation about the degrees that we need for the future and kill the degrees that are no longer relevant. Because you find that, often universities are still continuing, and they sometimes make a lot of money out of offering programs or degrees that are completely dead end. They have no use to anyone. So we're having those conversations, but also mobilizing the private sector professional bodies. We work, for instance, with the Health Professional Council, the Engineering Council, the Actuarial Society, the Chartered Accountants, and all of them to say, guys, how do we make sure that we're creating a pipeline to produce the skills that are going to grow our economy? They're going to, do something for these young people that we are trying to build. And the structure that we've created is a complete grant. Often I get criticized that, well, why do you have grants for students? There must be an element of paying back what they're doing. But, my children get full grants because I can afford to pay for them. And often people say, no, but people don't appreciate if you just give them grants. So we found a way, working with the Department of Trade and Industry, who recently, about 2 months ago, amended the generic codes for good practice under the Skills Development Code, which is Code 300. Companies or employers can allocate up to 2.5% of their payroll in exchange or for the benefit of getting 4 additional B points. And we hope we're going to raise up to about 20 billion rand a year just out of that. And we can put that money into supporting students at university. So the way that it works, we're working with government now on a PPP because NSFAS funds students that come from families that earn between 0 to 350,000 rand household income. And we are focusing on students that come from families that earn between 350,001 to 600,000, the so-called missing middle. Okay, so if you look at that, there are some differences because government is interested in our model. And I'll show you just the academic results that we've received, that we've managed to achieve. So we fund from undergrad to postgrad. NSFAS only funds is first certificate. And there's a major challenge with that. For instance, all universities that have medical schools, I find that people can't get into medical school, as an example. So they go and do a BA, a BSc nursing, or some other, a BSc, a straight BSc, and they're funded by NSFAS. But when they now get into the medical faculty to do MBCHB, they can no longer be funded by NSFAS because they already have a certificate or a degree. So we pick them up, and there's literally thousands of those kids. So rather than sending students to Cuba, what about just sorting out the students that we've got here that, in fact, are even better prepared, are better students because they've now got a first degree, so they know how it's like to be at university, and their chances of success are much, much better than a student who comes from matric, still tries to become a doctor and that kind of thing. So just an example. And we found the full cost of study, but that's not the end. The most important thing is to provide complete wraparound support to the students. So for every student that we fund, we have a technology platform now where we track each of the students that we have. They have to log into our platform. The platform is now being integrated with the university systems, the learning management systems, as well as the student management system, so that we can see what happens to that student. Are they passing their tests? Are they submitting assignments? Are they submitting the projects? So we don't wait for students to give us results. We get those results, and we pay for the program managers in each faculty that actually monitor and manage those students. So if a student has a problem with accommodation, with food, their devices are broken, maybe their stethoscopes or their laptops are broken, there's someone that they can go and talk to who helps them sort it out on the spot. So, and that model has proven to be really successful because universities, whilst they employ those people, are getting additional resources. We pay for them. We pay for those program managers on the ground, and we're building capacity in the university, especially the historically black university. So if you're in Venda or Limpopo, Walter Sisulu, Zululand, suddenly they have the third stream of income which they never had, because typically if you're at Wits or University of Pretoria, there are endowments, there are allocations of people that fund from the private sector, from their own endowments or philanthropies and so on. The historical black universities only get the fees and the government block grant. So suddenly we're bringing the third stream of income, which is building capacity at these universities. So how much is this? If you look at it, it's a lot of money. So NSFAS, the total requirements for NSFAS since Zuma made the announcement for fee-free education is about 42 billion rand a year. For the missing middle, this is universities only. For the missing middle, we need 26 billion a year. Okay, so that's why we have to work with government to see how we can generate this additional money without increasing taxes. You and I are paying 15% VAT from 14% last year because of the decision that was made to actually make higher education free. That's how we all ended up paying 15% VAT. So we can't, as a country, especially with the economy being where it is, we can't increase taxes. The government can't go and borrow more money because we are already up to our eyeballs in terms of our debt. We've got the ESCOMs and all the other problems that we've got in the country. So we had to find an innovative way. How do we raise this kind of money? That's where we then found fertile ground at the DTI to actually do this. So, and if you look at the students, so this is now our third year. We have 1,700 students across 11 universities. So we do engineering, medicine, data science, actuarial science, chartered accountants, all the priority skills so that we have. So it's, it's proven quite successful. The next slide. And for the students that we fund, 92% pass rate. So there's nothing wrong with the students. If they are given proper financial aid, proper wraparound support, there's nothing wrong with the students. They pass, 92 pass rate. When you look at corporate bursaries, typically corporate bursaries on average, and we've done the numbers, the pass rates are somewhere around 60 to 65% if you run your own corporate bursary. If you look at NSFAS, it's somewhere around 45 to 50%. So at 92%, the return on investment is by order of magnitude higher than what you'd get typically. Why? Because it's a holistic way of how you think about skills, how you think about supporting young people, how you sort out even the learning and teaching at universities to make sure that it's relevant for the future. So, I mean, this is just a comparison with NSFAS. So the pass rates are more than double. So actually the model works. So the next slide. And we're now piloting, if you just skip, the next slide, we're now piloting a number of really innovative ways of how you fund it. For instance, we're running next slide, a social impact bond, at the University of Pretoria and the Faculty of Engineering, where you have funders that pay for the students as they come into the Faculty of Engineering and build the capacity there. And then you have funders that are going to pay for the offtakes. So we're creating a social impact bond. If you understand the concept of impact investing, we hope to scale this out across the country, to be able to do this. As I say, this is going to be at the University of Pretoria. It's a complex thing, but already we've had an impact bond, a social impact bond, bond for jobs, which Harambee, is involved in. You have an ECD social impact bond that's been done in the Western Cape, and this is one of the few ones that we are now, creating. And the important thing with the social impact bond is that you have people who may be looking for a return, a financial return as well as a social return. So you're able to accomplish both through a structure such as a social impact bond to be able to achieve it. The next case study is about the NECT. So going back to 2013, I'm not sure if some of you could remember, that's the year when there were books that were dumped in rivers and there were, children falling into pit latrines and that kind of thing. A few of us came together and said, well, how do we assist and support government in dealing with the problem of basic education? So I became a co-founder of the NECT, the National Education Collaboration Trust, which is how do we mobilize, the difference with the NECT is that we brought labor as well to the table. So we have SATU, NAPTOSA, there are 5 teacher unions that are involved in the initiatives with government, as well as the private sector. Government allocates money into the NECT. At the moment, they allocate about 60% of the budget that we run. We have a budget about close to 300 million rand a year to really do a whole lot of things. From policy, for instance, we advocated and pushed for the change and the migration of early childhood development for the DSD, Department of Social Development, to DBE. We're now helping the department. We're running a project office for them in terms of how that migration is going to work. Secondly, the 21st century curriculum. So we've taken the CAPS curriculum, which was 100% academic. There now is 3-stream curriculum, and we've been working with government on how we think about the technical curriculum and the vocational curriculum. And then sort out the high schools, because we shut down all the technical high schools we used to have. So how do you revive them, but in the context of the 21st century? So we're busy helping government with that, as the NECT curriculum. So the implementation and coverage of the curriculum in schools. So typically schools never cover more than 50% of the curriculum. I'm talking about public schools. And we've developed tools for government, for curriculum trackers, for lesson plans that are now implemented across 2/3 of the system, about 17,000 of the 24,000 schools in the country. And we're starting to see results. So if you just move forward, these are the companies that are involved. Again, we have the private sector that's really part of this initiative. And there are a number of things that we've done. As I said, we now cover about 70% of the schools that we've got in the system. The next slide, and just some of the things that we are sorting out. How do you sort out governance, leadership in schools? In other words, you have a Schools Act, you have SGBs, but often SGBs have become very politicized themselves. So how do you make sure that we're building capacity for the SGBs to play the role they're supposed to be playing in schools, as opposed to just playing politics? Play a proper oversight role as it happens in companies, as an example. How do we empower the school management teams, in other words, the school exco's, to do the work they're supposed to be doing? Because often you have a principal and you have an SGB, and people just don't understand governance. They don't understand the framework and the difference of the roles and responsibility of the SGB versus an SMT. So we get involved in some of those things. But also, it means I must rush and stop talking. How do we mobilize the private sector and other resources, to make sure that we are addressing the issues? And also, how do we create conversations? So, we've organized a whole lot of dialogues on ECD, dialogues on the value of the National Senior Certificate, as an example. So that, if people can't continue just having this debate every year in January, when the matric results are announced by government, you have people who say, no, but the government has watered down these. So we brought a whole lot of stakeholders, researchers, professors, academics, Umalusi, the unions, in the same room. Let's talk about our National Senior Certificate. Is it worth the paper that it's written on? And if it's not, what needs to be done to improve the quality of the National Senior Certificate, as an example? So out of that, there are a whole lot of proposals that are now being implemented to improve the quality of our education system. So just some of the, just stay there. Some of the things that we've done, in schools, we're now in about 17,000 schools. We've trained about 92,000 teachers in mathematics and science. We have created more than 6 million tools, including curriculum trackers, lesson plans that are now being used, across the system, and the government co-funds it. So we got a special dispensation from National Treasury that we don't follow the PFMA, because sometimes good governance in terms of PFMA can stall things. So we have proper governance and procurement things that you would be familiar with in the private sector, but we get money from government, we get money from the private sector, and we go and do the projects across the system. So it's just a few examples of things that, that we're doing. Next slide. So, just some of the 21st century learning and teaching. So, we all know that the current world of work has changed. It's changing dramatically. But curriculum takes really long to change. So we're now running a pilot in a number of schools, particularly in Limpopo, on the 21st century learning and teaching new curriculum, which includes coding, robotics, computing. It includes, all the other, areas, obviously with mathematics being quite important, because if you don't want to do computing, you can't just do maths literacy. So, you've got to look at, but also changing things like life orientation. I've been saying for years, and I'm really pleased that government has now, sort of listened, because life orientation should not have been an examinable subject. In fact, there are a lot of other things, for instance, that we do in our schools, in Future Nation schools. We have 12 learning areas that are not optional, that every student has to do. They have to do entrepreneurship, they have to do leadership, they have to do computing, they have to do mathematics. We don't have math literacy in our schools. And kids actually cope if they are supported. So, it just shows that sometimes the way that we think has got to be different. And that's why I'm privileged in that we sort of look at our schools as Future Nation schools Not as schools that say, bring your children here because the government system is failing. We look at our schools as a laboratory for things that are possible, that we can do in the big system. And that's why I'm privileged in that I can work across the two systems. I talked about the dialogues. So, we've organized a whole lot of discussions because, South Africa is a democratic country. Different voices are important. So otherwise, we end up just drinking our own Kool-Aid. So it's important to listen to different views on some of the issues that we face. And there are some lessons. Obviously, things take long. So we operate up to the senior phase. We don't, because I keep getting asked this question, when are we going to see the improvement in the matric results? Education is a long-term game. It is a long-term game. So things don't change that quickly. And that's sometimes part of the problem, because you have politicians that are elected for 5 years, and they want to leave some legacy in 5 years. But actually, when you think about it, from preschool to matric is about 17 years. So things don't just change quickly. You have to take a long-term view in terms of how you're going to change things in the education system. But yeah, to conclude, we're seeing really positive results across both initiatives that I just wanted to talk about. Thank you very much.